And all right, yes, I think we are recording now. So you were here last Monday, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, last Monday, you'll remember that what we talked about, we were using logic and science to demonstrate that our universe can explain itself.
Correct.
Right? You'll remember we looked at the second law of thermodynamics that brought out that the universe is not eternal. So that means that everything is kind of running down. Everything's kind of wearing out. So I like to think of the universe as kind of like a watch that's been wound up, but now it's winding down. And so what the second law of thermodynamics states, and what it implies, is basically that the universe isn't eternal, that watch had to be wound up at some point, that the universe had to have been created if it's going to start to wear down. You know, does that make sense?
Yep.
And what we also looked at from last week, that science has proven that the universe didn't create itself from nothing. You know, and so the only explanation that we have is that the universe was created outside of itself by something that is outside of it and superior to it, and that's where God comes in.
Correct.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Every house is made by someone, but the builder of all things is God. And so if the universe is the effect, then the universe requires something that is not like itself, namely a pure cause, to explain itself, which is God. So what I want to do tonight is build on what we looked at last week. I want to add to that concept by showing more evidence that God exists in two facets. Number one, we're going to look at the universe and examine how the universe bears the marks of design. And then we're going to examine morality as well, because morality points to the existence of a creator. So when it comes to purposeful design demands a designer. You know, that car that's out in your driveway right now, you know, what model is it? What model car do you have?
It's a Nissan.
The people at the Nissan factory, is the factory basically all the workers at Nissan taking what, hundreds of thousands of parts that make up that one car, right?
That is correct.
Yes.
And hey, Sheila.
Hey.
And so they take all those parts and they just throw them off a cliff. And when it hits the bottom of the cliff, there's your Nissan and it's ready to drive, right? Is that how a Nissan's made?
Not how.
No.
Of course not. And it's completely ridiculous. It's completely illogical to say anything like that, right?
Right.
So logic demands that if anything has order, if anything is arranged in a way that would make it useful, then that means that it had a cause, and not just a cause, but an intelligent cause, a purposeful cause. And so with that in mind, just in your minds, picture the universe, think about how vast it is, think about all the numerous solar systems, and all the way down to the microscopic world of molecules and cells and genes and nuclei and all that. All of that clearly shows design and purposeful arrangement. So here's the question. Is it more reasonable to believe that the design characteristic of the universe was planned, or that it happened by accident?
Planned.
That's what we're going to be looking at tonight.
Yeah.
I want us to think about some things for a few minutes when it comes to the universe. We know that the universe operates according to precise astronomical laws. I mean, that's why you can take a rocket, you can launch it to the moon, and you can direct that rocket to land within feet of its intended target, right?
Correct.
Solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, they can be forecast centuries in advance. You know, were you all aware of that? I wasn't aware of that until I did the research for this class, you know. And you look around us here on this planet, you look around us in the world of nature, and you see everything functioning together in complete harmony.
Yeah.
Now, you might have heard that I'm taking classes myself on Christian evidences, on apologetics, that I'm kind of getting an unofficial degree in it right now. That's what I'm working towards. Well, I just took a class on philosophy. And let me tell you something. If you ever want to take a class that will just let you know just how dumb you really are, take a class on philosophy. Trust me. I was like, man, I am not smart at all.
Wow.
But here's one thing that I learned in that class, and that is we looked at a bunch of these philosophers from the past that are famous, like people like George Berkeley and others, and all of them, when they looked at the harmony of nature and they saw everything functioning together in perfect harmony in the world around us, all of them attributed this harmony of nature to God. There was a British astronomer named Sir James Johns, and he declared that the universe looks, quote, more like a great thought than a great machine. And he did a lot of scientific studies, and based on those scientific studies, he said, we discover that the universe shows evidence of a designing or controlling power that has something in common with our own minds. Now that, I find that very interesting. The universe looks more like a great thought than a great machine. The universe shows evidence of a designing or controlling power, and that designing or controlling power has something in common with our own minds. That's what an astronomer concluded.
Huh.
But today, many of today's philosophers and today's scientists and today's physicists, they prefer to solve their problems without referring to God. And they're finding it more and more difficult to leave God out of the equation because they acknowledge that nature operates on mathematical principles. Do you know who that guy is on the screen? You recognize him?
Familiar.
He looks a little familiar, doesn't he? Rick, you have any idea?
I recognize the face. I can't call the name.
All right, I'll give you the first name, Albert.
Einstein.
There you go, Albert Einstein. I mean, people saw all of the scientists of today. They look to Einstein as one of the greats, right? And
Yes.
what they observed about Einstein was how he was able to discover certain laws of nature and predict other laws of nature. And all he did was solve mathematical equations like that one on the screen. Have you heard of that one? Maybe a high school math class or high school science class. Did you see that written on a blackboard somewhere?
Mm.
E equals MC squared. Don't ask me what that means. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah.
That's like one of the more famous scientific equations, and it's attributed to Albert Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, they look at Einstein and say, see, he was able to figure all this out, and all he used was math. God was not part of the equation here, and so that's what they want to do. Yeah. And it's a great mystery to them as to how and why nature can operate in such precise, designed ways. If you guys have a Bible, open it up to Romans 1, and if I could have someone read verse 21 and verse 28. Romans 1, verse 21 and verse 28.
I got to get there.
Take your time.
Romans 1, verse 21.
Yes.
Okay. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened.
All right,
Professing,
can you go and read verse 28 too? Verse 28.
okay. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting.
All right, so think about what Paul's saying here. Let's apply it to the scientists and the philosophers and the physicists of today. They want to leave God out of the equation, and it's hard for them to figure out how to do that. And we know why it's such a great mystery to them. Look at verse 28. Verse 28 is basically saying that they refuse to acknowledge God, right?
Yes.
They refuse to acknowledge God. Now look back at verse 21. Verse 21 shows the result of refusing to acknowledge God. They become futile in their thinking.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. Think about our solar system for a second. Specifically planet Earth. There's planet Earth right there in our solar system. Okay. Now on the screen there, you see all the planets of our solar system and you see how they are all orbiting around the sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only one of these planets that I could point out to you other than planet Earth is Saturn, because it has the rings around it. I don't know any of the other ones there. I know Mars. I think Mars is farthest away. Pluto, I don't even think Pluto's a planet anymore. They said it wasn't a planet. But do you notice where Earth is? Earth is like third in line from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Think about this. Did you know that the precise location of our planet in this solar system, the fact that it is not where Saturn is, or not closer to the sun like maybe Mercury is, but the fact that it is right third in line, that by itself shows remarkable purpose, because if it was anywhere closer to the sun or any farther away from the sun, human beings and plant life and animals would not be able to exist. Did you all know that?
Didn't know that, but it makes sense.
The Earth is estimated to be 93 million miles away from the sun.
Wow.
And that distance happens to be exactly what it needs to be when it comes to finding the right temperature to sustain life on this planet. If we were any closer, even by 10,000 miles, if we were any closer, we would all burn up. And if we were only 10,000 miles further away, we would all freeze to death. That is very interesting to me.
Yes.
Here's something else. The Earth also travels in an elliptical orbit around the sun, but it doesn't do that constantly. It doesn't do that at a constant rate. So when we are closer to the sun, we move faster around the sun. And when we are farther away from the sun, we move slower around the sun. Here, my question is all this due to chance, or was it by design? Think about it.
Yeah.
Here's something else. The Earth also rotates on its axis at about 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. Now, there's a chemist out there by the name of Abraham Cressy Morrison, and he wrote a book that says, the title of the book is Man Does Not Stand Alone. And this is what he says about the Earth's rotation. He says, its rotation on its axis is determined so accurately that a variation of a second in a century would upset astronomical calculations. Think about the implications of that. It's Now, here's something else. Look, you see on the screen, you see the picture of the Earth there. All that blue stuff, we all know what that is. What's all that blue stuff?
Water.
Exactly. All of us are aware that the majority of this planet's surface is covered with water. In fact, 3/4 of this planet is covered with water. Why is there so much water on this planet? Do you all know? Well, I gave you the answer on the screen.
Yeah, the answer. It reduces, is it something dealing with the temperature?
That's right. That's right. I will never be able to give you all the pop quiz on this. I'm never give you all the answer. But that's exactly right. The water reduces temperature extremes. Again, does that happen by chance or by design? Why is it that we can't, if we're stranded in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and we run out of bottles of water like this one? I mean, we're surrounded by water in the Atlantic Ocean. Why can't we just take a drink out of the Atlantic Ocean?
It's not by design.
Yeah, exactly. What's wrong with the water that's in the Atlantic Ocean?
Salty.
It's salty, right?
Yeah.
And did y'all ever wonder why the ocean contains so much salt? Anyone know? The salt in the ocean is, hold on one second. The salt in the ocean is what is able to form the clouds and the rain up there in the atmosphere. And not only that, but it's the salt in the ocean that keeps those clouds and rain from having high levels of acid and alkaline. Because if there was a lot of acid and alkaline in the rain that came down from the clouds in the sky, that would harm our crops. So we wouldn't be able to eat.
Yeah.
So which is more logical, that all this happened by chance or that it happened by design? It's amazing how all of this just works out so precisely, and it's all for our benefit. If any of this did not happen, then we would not be able to survive on this planet. Did you know this? Here's something else. Did you know that our atmosphere exerts a pressure of approximately 15 pounds on every square inch of the Earth's surface, which means that right now there is some 30,000 pounds on your human body right now. Now, why is it that if 30,000 pounds is pressing down on us, why are we still alive? Why have we not instantly disintegrated at birth? It's because we were designed for that. Our bodies were designed to be able to take 30,000 pounds of pressure, of air pressure on us, and we don't even think about it. We don't even feel it. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, all this points to design. You guys got a Bible, go over to Psalm 139, and if someone can read verses 13 and 14 for me. Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. Hey, Chandra, are you here? No, I thought I admitted Chandra a second ago, but I don't see her. If you all have Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14, go ahead and read it.
For your creator, for you created my innermost being by knitting me together in my mother's womb. That's verse 13.
And if you could read, verse 14 too, please.
Verse 14, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your work are wonderful. I know that full well.
If you read the context of this psalm, the psalmist is contemplating how our human bodies were put together. And so while he's contemplating how we are made, he's motivated to say to God, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. He's exactly right, isn't he?
Yeah.
Let me give you some information about your body and my body. Did you know that the human body, well, I'm sure you do know this. You've probably been taught this in class. The human body is composed of literally multiplied trillions of cells. And in the nucleus of each one of these cells, there are hundreds of thousands of genes. And in each one of these genes, there is a complex chemical called DNA. You've heard that, right? Mm-hmm. Your DNA that you have in just one gene, that's in just one of those trillions of cells that make up your body. That DNA has a complicated code that shows exactly how you develop as an individual in every way. So when I did the research on this, it was mind-boggling to me to think about this. If the coded instructions found in the DNA of just one cell of a human being were put into English, they would fill a 1,000 volume encyclopedia.
Wow.
That's according to one scientist. Now, our body is made up of trillions of cells. The DNA code in just one of those cells would fill a 1,000 volume encyclopedia if it was translated into English. It is estimated that the total DNA in just one human body, just Rick Adams by himself, that all of the DNA that is in your body would reach across one end of this solar system to the other. Now, again, the question I have is that due to accident or was that by design?
Design.
Exactly. It's by design. And here's the thing, without this intricately designed process of replication that's found in our DNA, we could not pass along life with continuity because DNA is the language of life. Human reproduction couldn't happen without DNA. There's a guy by the name of Dr. James Coppedge. He's a director of probability research in biology. And here's the question that he raised. It's a very significant question. By all the rules of reason, could there be a code which carries a message without someone originating that code? It would seem self-evident that any such complex message system, which is seen to be wise and effective, requires not only an intelligence, but a person back of it. Who wrote the DNA code? Who is the author of this precise language? There is no evolutionary explanation that even begins to be an adequate answer. Think about that. There's an evolutionist by the name of C.P. Haskins, and he was in a discussion about how complex the functions of DNA are. And while he was in this discussion, he said that the most sweeping evolutionary questions at the level of biochemical genetics are still unanswered. And then he made a confession that is really mind-blowing. Here's what he confessed. He said that if it wasn't for scientists being biased towards evolution, quote, this puzzle would have been interpreted as the most powerful sort of evidence for special creation. In other words, for Genesis in the Bible being true. Think about that. The only reason why a lot of people are rejecting God and saying that science is not compatible with God is because of the bias towards evolution. That is amazing to me. But here's even more evidence. Beyond our DNA, your human body, it's a huge assembly of related systems. I mean, we have our skeletal system, we have our muscular system, our digestive system, our circulatory system, our respiratory system, our nervous system, our reproductive system. I can go on and on. And each one of our body's systems is composed of millions of components, and all of them are related to each other. And each of the systems depends on the others if our bodies are to function properly. Did all that happen by design, or did it happen just by accident? You know, I used...
That's common sense.
I was talking about Rick's Nissan earlier. I'm showing you on the screen here in the smaller picture, the picture of a Boeing 747 being assembled there. A Boeing 747 is made up of 4 million parts. 4 million parts, and not one of those parts by themselves can fly.
Right.
But when they are organized according to a pattern of creative design, guess what happens?
It flies.
It flies. And our human bodies are infinitely more complex than an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So how in the world are they able to function unless we were created and the person who created us designed us to be that way?
That's right.
And here's the thing, evolutionists know this. Deep down, they know this. On the screen there are 2 evolutionists, George Gaylord Simpson, C.S. Pittendrigg, here's one more too, L.H. Tiffany. All of these evolutionists compared our living systems that are in our bodies to a complex, highly ordered structure like a modern building. And here's what they declared. The chance origin of the particular arrangement, which is a particular kind of living cell, is utterly negligible. And what they meant by that is the probability that our human bodies just came together completely by chance is so small that logic demands that we disregard it altogether. Think about the implications of that. And you know, I keep on telling you all to think, right? I say, think about that. Well, what organ in your body do you use to think?
Brain.
Exactly. So think about your brain for a minute. And by the way, did you know that humans are the only creatures that can think about their brains? Did you know that? I didn't know that.
Me neither. Wow.
There is an atheist. He's passed away now, so I guess he's no longer an atheist. But when he was alive, he was an atheist. His name was Isaac Asimov, and he was talking about our brains. And he said that man's brain is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. Our brain, just each one of our brains has more complexity and more design in it than a Boeing 747 or Rick's Nissan or the World Trade Center or anything else. Have any of you been in the bookstore recently and seen that book, or have you ever heard of that book, or the author of that book? The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is an atheist. He is one of the most famous atheists in the world. He's an Oxford professor. The reason he's famous is because he has written anti-God, pro-atheist, pro-evolution books like this one on the screen, The God Delusion. But here's the thing. Here's what he says if you ask him about the universe and whether the universe is without design, he will say that the universe is without design. That's what he will say. But in spite of that, when you get him talking about the human brain, here's what he conceded. This is a quote from Richard Dawkins, atheist, the guy who says that the universe is without design. He said, "The complexity of living organisms is matched by the elegant efficiency of their apparent design. If anyone doesn't agree that this amount of complex design cries out for an explanation, I give up." And if I was able to talk to Richard Dawkins, I would say, Richard, it does indeed cry out for an explanation. And the explanation for the complexity of your brain is what you call a delusion. God. Mm-hmm. God is the explanation. Mm-hmm. The ability of our brains to affect both voluntary and involuntary muscular function amazes me. But not just that, think about your brain's capacity and ability to reason. There's an evolutionist by the name of Sir Julian Huxley, and he was discussing what he called the complexity of organization and the functions of the brain. And he wrote, "The miracle of the mind is that it can transmute quantity into quality. This property of the mind is something given. It just is so. It cannot be explained. It can only be accepted." An evolutionist is saying that it cannot be explained. And here's what I would say to Mr. Huxley. When you rule out God, of course, you can't explain the miracle of the mind. If you add God to the equation, you can easily explain the miracle of the mind. When atheists argue against the idea of an intelligent God, think about this. Think about this. The next time you encounter an atheist and they are saying that there is no God, is that atheist actually trying to tell you that their argument that they are making, that God does not exist, that their argument is merely nonsensical sounds that issue from a disorganized mass of cerebral tissue in their head, their brain? Because if the human brain is simply irrational matter in motion, which a lot of atheists say that that's what the human brain is, if that's what the human brain really is, then why should we even listen to their arguments that God doesn't exist? Because their arguments come from their brains. And their brains are simply irrational matter in motion. You see the point that I'm making? They're defeating their own argument. If you have anyone, and if they are rational, if they are logical, then ultimately they must be forced to conclude that their mind was designed by a rational source. Does anyone have any thoughts or question about design, the argument of design that points to God's existence?
No.
I'd like to change the topic for the time we have left and talk about the part of our minds which is our conscience. And the reason I want to talk about our conscience is because our conscience has to do with morality. And morality also proves the existence of God. I'm going to read to you Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. You can follow along in your Bibles if you want. But here's what Paul was talking about here. Now, in the context, Paul's talking about non-Jews. He's talking about Gentiles who did not have the law of Moses, the Old Testament, to guide them. Here's what he says. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law, talking about the law of Moses. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. Now, notice he's talking about our consciences. Our conscience is the quality of our mind that either accuses our conduct or excuses our conduct. Do you all know what I mean by that? Has your conscience ever been violated? Have you ever violated your conscience? Have any of you ever violated your conscience ever in your life? You ever done anything and then later you went back and you just felt so bad? You were like, man, I should not have done that. That was a bad thing for me to do. That's your conscience, right? Your conscience is speaking up and saying you did a bad thing. Yeah. Now, how does your conscience determine that? For example, we all know what happened, 19 years ago on that terrible September morning, September 11th, in New York, right? Those terrorists flew the planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Do you think that their consciences bothered them as they were flying the planes into the buildings? What do you think?
No, they didn't. No, it didn't.
Yeah, I think it did not. But why is that? Why is it that their consciences didn't bother them? Anyone have an idea?
Well, I think it's the same way with us when we do something that goes against the will of God. We justify doing it.
That's right. Well, do you think that they thought that what they were doing that morning was violating the will of God?
No.
In fact, according to their religion, it was exactly what God wanted them to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
See, they were taught that that was the right thing to do. In Acts 23, verse 1, the Apostle Paul said that he had lived his entire life in good conscience up until that moment. Now, we know that Paul, of course, was a Christian trying his level best to follow Jesus, right? But was there a part of Paul's life, was there a time in Paul's life when he was not a Christian and he was persecuting Christians? Anyone, does anyone remember? Was there a time in Paul's life when he was persecuting Christians and he was not a Christian? Sure there was. And the thing is that his conscience was not bothering him during that time in his life when he was persecuting Christians. And the reason his conscience was not bothering him during that time was because he had been taught that that was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And he had to be retaught that it was the wrong thing to do when he became a Christian. So our conscience doesn't determine what is moral or immoral, but our conscience does recognize that morality exists. Otherwise, our conscience would never bother us if we did something wrong. And what that means is that logic demands that we recognize that there is an ultimate moral source, and each of us are accountable to that moral source. So with this in mind, there are some important questions about morality that we really do need to answer. Number one, where did morality come from? Where did morality come from? Let's hypothetically say that God does not exist. So if we do not acknowledge an eternal mind which defines what is truly good and what is truly bad, how in the world can we explain morality? Where did morality come from? Is it feasible that somehow raw, non-living matter was able, by some extended process, to concoct and promote and maintain morality? That doesn't make sense at all. But you know, a lot of atheists and evolutionists, what do they say? They say that mankind, you know, that when we were primitive, we were just cavemen, and we evolved from animals, right? All right. So think about the very first human beings. Okay. I want you to think about two cavemen way, way back, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And those two cavemen, they're sitting in their cave, and right next to them is the unconscious body of a cave woman. They've just clubbed the cave woman over the head, and they've raped her because they are wanting to satisfy their primitive animalistic urges. Okay?
Okay.
Just out of nowhere, let's just hypothesize, just out of nowhere, suddenly one of the cavemen looks at the other caveman and he says, you know what? I think we just did a bad thing. I don't think we should have hurt this woman in this way. In fact, you know what? I think that from now on, hitting her over the head with a club is wrong. And raping her is wrong. In fact, here's what we should do from here on out. We should not do anything sexual with the woman unless she allows us to, and she is a willing participant. In fact, I think we should go even further. I think that nothing sexual should happen between a man and a woman unless first they both make this lifelong commitment to each other, where they will only be committed to each other and only love each other and forsake all others till death do they part. That's not, let's call this concept marriage. What do you think?
No.
Yeah, I mean, how feasible is it that they just came up with that out of nowhere?
No.
So where did these moral concepts come from? I mean, if we came from the animals, if we evolved from monkeys, then okay, did we get the idea of morality from monkeys?
No.
Have any of you watched the Discovery Channel?
Yes.
What are they doing on the Discovery Channel? They are killing each other. Animals are killing each other. They are killing and eating their own children if they're hungry enough, right?
Yes.
And as far as sexual morality goes, they're going from partner to partner. There is no such thing as marriage in the animal kingdom, right?
No.
All right, so were we influenced to have the moral standards of monogamous marriage and non-violence? Did we get that from the animals?
No.
No, we didn't. So did we come up with it ourselves? Well, let's say that we did come up with it ourselves. The caveman who decides that from now on he is not going to, if he is in the mood, he is actually going to have to inconvenience himself and woo a woman and court her and get her to fall in love with him and commit to her, no other women for the rest of his life. And if he's angry at someone, that he is going to control himself so that he does not kill them, but instead he is going to force himself to be patient with them and be nice to them, even though they're not being nice to him. That caveman's putting a lot of limitations on himself, isn't he?
Yes.
He's making life pretty hard for himself. I mean, if he kept it up the way he had been doing it before, where he lives with this anything goes philosophy, you know, my way or the highway, I mean, he would be king of his own world, right?
Right.
Why in the world would he put these moralistic limitations on himself? Here's the thing. All sane, rational people everywhere recognize a need for morality. There is no sane person that will argue that absolutely anything goes. Now, Rick, I don't know if you would be familiar with this. Sheila, you might be familiar with this. If any of you guys have children or grandchildren that have seen the movie Frozen, the Disney cartoon, any of you familiar with that at all?
I've seen it.
Just the song.
Just the song. Right, you remember that line in the song where the main character Elsa, she sings, "No right, no wrong, no rules for me."
Yeah.
You know, when my girls sing that, because they watch Frozen incessantly, it makes me want to tear my hair out. I can't stand it. But when they sing that song, and they sing "No right, no wrong, no rules for me," right now, since they're only 6 years old and 9 years old, I smile and I say, "Oh, that's cute," right? But if I came across an actual grown adult, and that was truly their philosophy, that they really believed, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. Well, if any of you encountered someone and that was their philosophy of life, they truly believed there was no such thing as right, there was no such thing as wrong, and the rules, they did not apply to that person. You guys would probably think at best that person was extremely immature, right?
Right.
And at worst, you would be wanting to call the men in the white coats, right?
They're dangerous.
Yeah, they're dangerous.
Yeah.
Every sane person will not go along with the concept of anything goes. The words ought and ought not are just as much a part of the atheist vocabulary as our vocabulary. Now, it's true that a human being may become so insensitive that he virtually ignores his own personal ethical responsibility. But if someone else ignores their ethical responsibility and hurts him, he's not going to ignore that. Even those who are immoral want people to treat them morally. Every person you ever meet who says that morality does not exist and says that anything goes, if they're going to be consistent, then they would have to admit that there would be nothing wrong if someone stole from them or even killed them. But they're not going to say that, are they? See, even unbelievers admit that morality exists only in conjunction with personal minds. On the screen is Dr. George G. Simpson. He's an evolutionist, and he conceded that morals arise only in men. So if God does not exist, where does morality come from? Not only that, if God does not exist, what is the motivation for morality? Now, Christians try to live our lives morally because we are convinced that a moral God exists and that God has obligated humanity to morality for the good of mankind. But atheists can't say that. What can atheists say? Has morality evolved? Well, the skeptic would say, yes, society evolved morality for its own welfare and preservation. But we evolved from the animals, right? That's what the argument is, right? Did we evolve from the animals? I mean, isn't that the argument?
Yes.
But animals survive. I mean, we see animals every day, don't we? And they have no moral code whatsoever. And I thought evolution's all about survival of the fittest, right? You evolve because if you didn't evolve, you wouldn't survive, right? Animals don't have morals, and yet animals are still surviving. They are all around us. So evolution can't explain morality. Morality is not the product of evolution. Morality is the result of special design, and that implies a designer.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another question. What if I decide to put my own personal lusts, my own personal desires and interests above others? What if I say to myself, you know what, Rick, I only have one life to live and I'm going to live it for myself. Forget about my wife, forget about my children, forget about my parents. It's all about me. It's all about me. Now, Rick, would you say that I would be selfish if I had that type of attitude?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
And
well,
also dangerous again.
well, here's my point. So what? What's wrong with selfishness?
Yeah.
What's wrong with selfishness?
Except for this we're doing.
Exactly. The unbeliever, the atheist, can't answer that question. What's wrong with selfishness? You can't acknowledge that something is wrong universally without sooner or later acknowledging a source outside of humanity that came up with the standards of right and wrong. And deep down, atheists recognize this. On the screen is an atheist by the name of Bertrand Russell. And he wrote, "We feel that the man who brings widespread happiness at the expense of misery to himself is a better man than the man who brings unhappiness to others and happiness to himself. I do not know of any rational ground for this view." And the reason he said that last part, the reason he can't rationalize this is because he refuses to acknowledge the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Yeah.
Last question. How is morality to be defined outside of God? Now that's the issue that atheism dreads. What are the criteria that you would use to distinguish the good from the bad? Dr. George G. Simpson, evolutionist, he says that there are no universal, eternal, or absolute ethical criteria of right and wrong. Okay, let's say he's correct. If he's correct, then that means, Rick, that you have your own law and I have my own law. And so basically, each one of us have become our own God.
Right.
And you know what? That's not John Mitchell saying that, because that's what the Humanist Manifestos parts 1 and 2 say. Ethics, according to them, ethics are autonomous and situational. Now, Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2, these are documents that came out in the 20th century. They were written specifically for the purpose to deny the existence of God. That's why they were written. And they say ethics are autonomous. Autonomous means self-law. You come up with your own ethics. I come up with my own ethics. And ethics are also situational. Now that doesn't make sense. That is so contradictory, it is ridiculous when you think about it. Because think about this. If I say that ethics are situational, then what I'm saying is that I could actually do wrong in certain situations and it would be okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if ethics are also autonomous, if I am my own law, then how in the world would I ever be in that situation where my conduct would be wrong? My conduct wouldn't be wrong because I am my own law, and I'm never going to tell myself that I'm wrong, right? It doesn't make any sense.
No.
The plain fact of the matter is this: if there is no God, then evil doesn't exist. If there is no God, then there is no such thing as evil. There is no such thing as wrong if God does not exist. And the more courageous atheists will admit this. Back in the 1960s, this atheist was really famous, Jean Paul Sartre. And he said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. And man is in consequence forlorn, for he cannot find anything to depend upon either within or outside himself. Then he went on to say, nor, on the other hand, if God does not exist, are we provided with any values or commands that could legitimize our behavior. He gets it, and unfortunately, he died an atheist. but he understood the implications of atheism.
Mm.
If God does not exist, then there is no such thing as good or bad.
Mm.
Does immorality have an ultimate consequence if God does not exist? That's a good question, because when we admit that we possess moral responsibility, then that means that we must concede that there is ultimate moral accountability, which demands God. Let's say that Rick, let's say that you are a multimillionaire. Wouldn't you like to be a multimillionaire?
Yeah.
All right, let's hypothesize this, that you are a multimillionaire. And let's say hypothetically that I steal $10,000 from you.
Okay.
And in stealing $10,000 from you, I didn't hurt you at all. I didn't hurt you physically by doing so. And you're a multimillionaire. I'm not hurting you economically either by stealing $10,000 from you. Let's say I completely get away with it. You don't even realize it's gone.
I have so much money.
And let's say that I'm never caught because I'm that good.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Here's my question. Has a wrong been committed? If I steal $10,000 from a billionaire and I didn't hurt him physically, I didn't hurt him economically, and I didn't get caught, then has a wrong truly been committed? Will there ever be any consequence for what I've done?
Yes.
When all is said and done, if I have no moral responsibility, then that means I have no moral accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And so my stealing that money has no different effect than if I had chosen to do something really bad, like refuse to feed a starving child.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. We know that it was wrong for me to steal that money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though it didn't hurt you, even though I didn't get caught, it was still wrong for me to steal that money.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is no God, how can I say that? How can I say that? Let's say a woman gives birth to a severely mentally challenged baby. Let's say that baby, the child has virtually no self-awareness. It has so much mental deficiency, the child will never become productive ever. Would it be wrong to kill that child? Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course it would, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, does the existence of God have anything to do with us coming to that conclusion?
Yes.
Because there is no God, there is no ultimate source of moral standard, there is no moral accountability. So how would we be able to say that it would be wrong to kill that child? Do you know who that is?
Hitler.
Exactly. What was Hitler's rationale behind exterminating the Jews? If you read Mein Kampf, and I haven't read it, I've just read excerpts of it. But if you read what he wrote, you'll see this was Hitler's philosophy. Hitler thought along these same lines. Hitler did not believe that there was a God, and so he did not believe in any moral responsibility. He didn't believe in any moral accountability, so he could do whatever he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And look at it this way. The Apostle Paul and Adolf Hitler, they're both famous people in history, right? And both of them are dead.
Mm-hmm.
So far as they themselves are now concerned, does it really make any difference that they live their lives in such different ways?
Mm.
If in fact there are no ultimate consequences for our moral decisions? That's a very important question.
Mm.
The fact of the matter is that every atheist on earth, if they speak honestly and consistently with their philosophy, they have to admit that if God doesn't exist, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever how you live your life. If you think deeply enough, however,
Mm-hmm.
then you would have no choice but to reject that view because it's baseless, it's illogical,
Yeah.
it's even crude.
Yeah.
If there is no ultimate moral reckoning, nothing in this life makes sense at all. So let me close out the class by saying this. Here's what atheism's motto is. Atheism's Bible would say, in the beginning, nothing was, and nothing caused man to evolve from nothingness. With the passage of time from nothingness, man developed morality, which suggests that we ought to do right and not do evil. But the time is coming when again there will be nothing. Let us therefore fall down before the throne of nothing and be good. I think it should be obvious to every thinking person that if there are no eternal consequences for your actions, we're nothing more than animals with absolutely no moral responsibility whatsoever. But here's the thing. Does morality exist? It does exist. We do think that there are things that are right and that there are things that are wrong. Our consciences exist. Our consciences prove that morality exists. We all feel some sort of ethical responsibility, and we will give account for our earthly conduct. All of this points to a final reckoning before someone, and that someone is God.
Yeah.
So what we've seen tonight, the design of our universe, the design of our bodies, and also the fact that we were designed to feel that there are things that are right and things that are wrong, morality. None of that happened by accident. It's impossible that it happened by accident. Therefore, we were designed that way, and that means God exists. Any questions? Any comments?
No.
It's deep, isn't it?
Yes.
That's why we call this class Diving Deep.
Yeah. What was that first chapter we read? Was first two verses in Romans, I think it was.
Yeah, going on to Romans chapter 1, verse 21 and verse 28.
Yes. All right. So let me get there real quick because I had a thought about that.
Okay.
(21) and 28, right?
Right.
So in 21 it says, for although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him.
Yes, sir.
Although they knew God. And that's scary.
The thing that really stands out to me is if you read the previous verse, if you look at verses 19 and 20, it says, for what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, which is exactly what we've been talking about tonight. So they are without excuse. And that's why he would say in verse 21, although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. In other words, everything that they saw pointed logically that they were created, that there is a creator, that God does exist, but they don't want to acknowledge that. They refuse to accept it. And so it says they knew God, which means that they saw that the only logical explanation was that God exists, but they didn't want to accept that, because when you accept that, that means that you are limited in your behavior, and you don't want to be limited in your behavior. And so they ended up not honoring him as God or giving thanks to him, and that's how they became futile in their thinking. That's why you read these quotes in the class tonight of atheists who say Well, yes, it's obvious that our human brains are so complex. I can't understand it. How in the world are they so complex? Well, if you would just simply acknowledge God, it wouldn't be so hard for you to understand anymore. You know, morality exists. I don't know where it came from, but it exists. Well, if you would just stop being stubborn and acknowledge that you're wrong and God does exist, then you would understand where morality came from. So that's the scary part about that Romans passage. That's what the implication is. Any other thoughts or questions? All right, guys, we're going to have one more of these classes before we call it a break over Christmas, and then we'll pick it up in the new year, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're gonna be talking about we're going to be getting into stuff that proves that some things that you read about in the Bible actually happened. Like, is there evidence out there that the flood of Noah's Ark that covered the entire planet, is there evidence out there that really happened? We're going to get into that. What does the Bible say about dinosaurs? Believe it or not, the Bible does have some things to say about dinosaurs. And the evidence is out there that what you're being taught about dinosaurs is not actually true. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into a lot of stuff like this. And I hope that by the time we're done with this, and I think we're going to be done with this class, and we're going to move on to a different subject, probably we'll probably be done with it in February, I think, because there's a lot more where this came from. But I hope that by the time February comes and we're all done with this, that your faith will be strengthened and that you'll be able to get out there and share this with others to help them to understand that there is a God and they should follow him. I want to thank you guys for taking time out of your busy evenings to be with me. I really appreciate it.
Well,
I look forward to this every week.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. I really appreciate it. Rick, Elaine is in our prayers. You are too.
Thank you very much.
If you think of it, give me a call tomorrow. Let me know how it went, okay?
Will do. Thank you.
All right. God be with all of you.
All right. And you as well.
You too.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.